Great. So welcome everyone. I'm Meg Sherm, the director of the Hunt Library. Thanks so much for joining us this evening for this talk with Professor Catherine Sanderson on the science of happiness. Before we start, I'm going to introduce Catherine. I'm also going to talk about a couple of upcoming programs that we have happening at the library. This Saturday, April 26th at 11 a.m., we're going to host Holistic Cardiac Health Made Easy with Mary Uter, who's a nurse. So you can join us for that. Our band book club with the Falls Village Equity Project meets on Friday, May 2nd at 4 p.m. And our next book is Water for Elephants by Sarah Gurin. I have that book at the library if anyone would like to come take it out. And finally, our next art wall exhibit is going up next week. The reception for Anne Krause's exhibition, I Collect Clouds, will be on Saturday, May 3rd from 5 to 7 p.m. So if you're free and those things interest you, I hope that you will join us. If you'd like to support the library and help us continue to offer free programming for all ages, you can make a donation online, and I will put the link to donate in the chat. A little bit about Catherine. Catherine Sanderson is the Manuel Family Professor in Life Sciences Psychology at Amherst College. She received a bachelor's degree in psychology with a specialization in health and development from Stanford University, and received both master's and doctoral degrees in psychology from Princeton University. Professor Sanderson's research examines how personality and social variables influence health-related behaviors, such as safer sex and disordered eating, the development of persuasive messages and interventions to prevent unhealthy behavior, and the predictors of relationship satisfaction. This research has received grant funding from the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Health. Professor Sanderson has published more than 25 journal articles and book chapters, in addition to 5 college textbooks, a high school health textbook, and a popular press book on parenting. In 2012, she was named one of the country's top 300 professors by the Princeton Review. Professor Sanderson speaks regularly to public and corporate audiences on such topics as the science of happiness, emotional intelligence, the mind-body connection, and the psychology of good and evil. Thanks so much for being here with us tonight, Catherine.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. So about 8 years ago, I gave a version of this talk at a big financial services conference in Orlando, where people had the opportunity to go to hear my talk or different sessions in different breakout rooms. And a woman came to my talk on the science of happiness. And at the end of the talk, she came up to me and said, "You were great, and I really enjoyed it. And, I'm so glad I came to your session." And then she looked me right in the eye and she said, "And I have to be honest, I almost skipped your session because I just figured that I would hate you." And I said, "Wow, thank you for that unusual compliment. And may I ask why you assumed you would hate me?" And she said, "Well, I just figured anyone who talks about the science of happiness would be all about like kittens and rainbows, and you just be really irritating. And by the end of the talk, I would want to strangle you. And I don't. So thank you so much." And I now start this talk with that story because it actually really illustrates something profoundly important that I'm So there are some people in the world who are, congratulations. And this talk is going to be a wonderful affirmation of all of the great things that you are doing already. But here's the reality. I'm actually not one of those people. That I'm not someone who finds happiness easily and magically. I'm someone who really has to struggle to remind myself of the things that scientific research illustrates do in fact make us happy. And that's one of the reasons I love giving this talk, because it's a reminder for me and a reminder for all of those who are listening that there are specific things that we can do to increase happiness, even if we're not one of the lucky kittens and rainbows people. And so I want to start now with a quick poll, and I want you to think about yourself. So are you a kittens and rainbows person? There is no right answer here, but I'm always interested in seeing where people are. So please respond. It's anonymous. And then I will share the responses. And what's interesting is I do this talk for lots of different audiences. I do it for lawyers and teachers and doctors and high school students, et cetera. I do it for people of all ages. And the results were always pretty consistent in terms of the breakdown. Okay, so 83% of people have participated already. If you want to get your response in, this is your last chance, and I am going to shut the poll. So I'm giving you last chance for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share the results. So what you can see here, 80% of people not a kittens and rainbows person. And this is overwhelmingly what I find. It's always, 60, 70, 80, sometimes even 90% of people are like not a kittens and rainbows person. Maybe that's who comes to a talk on the science of happiness. But the point here is that for many of us, happiness isn't easy. It's not simple. But what's encouraging is that there are simple things that I will turn to throughout today's talk that give specific kinds of practical advice about what you can do. But before I start talking about what does make us happy, I actually want to talk about some mistakes that people make, because one of the problems in thinking about the science of happiness is that lots of people look for happiness in the wrong places. So when we think about the number one thing that people assume will make them happy, but in reality it doesn't, and that's money. Overwhelmingly, people think if I just had more money, surely I would have greater happiness. This is a picture of Tiger Woods' house, or maybe now Tiger Woods' ex-wife's house. And people think, boy, if I lived in a house like that here, every single minute of the day. But the reality is that we adapt pretty quickly to newfound wealth. So newfound wealth, in fact, does make us happy initially, but then we sort of adjust or adapt to that wealth, and it doesn't have a lasting, consistent impact on happiness. As Benjamin Franklin said, money has never made man happy, nor will it. There is nothing in its nature to produce happiness. The more of it one has, the more one wants. And that's really the challenge of money, that we have this expectation that more money will make us happy. And it does initially, but then the more of it one has, the more one wants. We think, I just need to get a little bit more money. And this phenomenon happens in lots of different circumstances in which we think, I'll be happy when. And I want to give a really simple example, and that is the advent of the cell phone. So I'm old enough that I can remember thinking about my very first cell phone, which looked pretty much like the far left for me end of that picture. And I was really excited when I got that phone, because although it was very big and very bulky, sometimes I could actually call people from the car. And that seemed amazing. Now, sometimes call people from the car. Now, if you were to take my current phone and give me that first phone, I would be very unhappy, because now we expect that our phones don't let us just call people from the car, but they also let us film a movie, read a book, buy a dress, and so on. There may challenge of adaptation, that we think this will be great, and then we just adapt to it, just like we adapt to more money. Now, before I go on, I want to say something really important. For people who are struggling with survival, for people who are living below the poverty line, for people who are thinking about money in terms of, do I have a safe place to sleep tonight? Do my kids have enough food? Are we going to have heat this winter? For people who are worried about survival, more money absolutely increases happiness. But beyond that effect, the increase of money does not consistently lead to a corresponding increase in happiness. So what else do we think will make us happy but really doesn't? Climate. Overwhelmingly, people think, if I just lived in a warmer, prettier climate, surely I would be happier. If you do large-scale surveys of Americans and you ask them, would you be happier if you lived in California or North Dakota? Pretty much everyone says California. But this is another example of us being wrong. A Gallup poll a few years ago asked people, would you be happier living in California or North Dakota? Everyone said California. But then they actually asked people who lived in California and North Dakota. And here's what they found. People in North Dakota, it's one of the top 5 happiest states. So people in North Dakota are, in fact, very happy. California, it's not. People living in North Dakota would be less happy. We're actually wrong in that belief. This belief, though, forms the basis of a joke that I tell students in my health psychology class. So here's the joke. Patient goes to a doctor, and the doctor says, I have terrible news. You have 6 months to live. And the patient says, that is terrible news. What do you expect? What what can I do? And the doctor says, you should immediately move to North Dakota. And the patient says, absolutely, I'll do that right away. And if I move to North Dakota, will I live longer? And the doctor says, no, but it will feel like forever. Now, people from North Dakota like super don't like that joke. But again, this joke is not based in reality. People in North Dakota are, in fact, very happy. So what else do we expect will make us happy, but really doesn't? Overwhelmingly, life events. We expect, I will be happy when this thing happens. And that could be, I will be happy when I graduate from high school or when I graduate from college. It'll be happy when I buy a house. It'll be happy when I get married. It'll be happy when I retire, whatever it is. When this thing happens, surely. But the challenge with looking for happiness in life events is exactly the same problem as looking for happiness in terms of more money, better cell phone, and so on. You expect, I will be happier when this thing happens. But the challenge is that overwhelmingly, you anticipate that you'll be happier when this thing happens, but then that thing actually happens and you adjust to it, you acclimate to it. So it doesn't bring you the permanent happiness. Initially, you're excited. I worked really, really hard. I got this promotion. You get the promotion, and then you actually do have to do that job, and that job has work and pressure and colleagues and deadlines and so on. I just got a note in the chat from you, and I just want to ask, am I freezing badly? Am I freezing badly? But I can't hear you because you are on mute. Sorry.
It's happening every once in a while, just for a couple of seconds.
Okay. Don't think there's anything I can do about it. And it probably means that we're having bad storms in my area.
Right. And thankfully, it's not terrible.
It's not terrible. Okay. Well, I'm going to hope that it gets better, but I'm sorry about that. That hasn't typically happened from my study, but that is an occupational hazard. Okay. And if you lose me, by the way, just tell me, and then I can, like, if you lose a section, and I can just repeat it, and hopefully it'll get stronger. Okay. One final life event that we often associate as with increased happiness, and that is the life event of having children, of being a parent. And this is a life event that overwhelmingly we anticipate, surely this life event is going to make me happier. But the challenge with having children is it actually is, of course, a huge amount of work. This is a picture of my 3 kids, now pretty outdated. They're now 26, 23, and 20. But in the abstract, it seems like having a children would be a really, great idea. And in this picture, my kids look really clean, quiet, well-behaved. But the reality day in and day out of parenting is it's really hard. It's doing huge amounts of laundry. It's literally touching somebody else's poop. And as the author Anne Lamott says, having a baby is like suddenly getting the world's worst roommate. And that's really the challenge in terms of thinking about happiness in children, is that there are definite highs, but there are definite lows. So what the research on the science of happiness and parenting says is really fascinating, that parents have more highs and parents have more lows, and non-parents have so being valedictorian or these sort of wonderfully special moments. And those peaks are bigger peaks than non-parents experience. But the problem is they also experience more lows of worry and stress and heartache. And so therefore, it's a little now, but Catherine, you have to remember, when you have children, you might get grandchildren, and grandchildren make me very happy. And what I say to that is I am really holding out hope that that will be the payoff eventually, maybe not imminently, but eventually. All right. So I'm now going to turn to the good news. And the good news is lots of empirical research reveals that there are specific things that we can do that lead to increased happiness. And some of these, in fact, are very simple. So we can do low-level behaviors in our day-to-day life that scientific research reveals boost happiness. Now, one of those is eating. But it's not just the act of like chewing and swallowing, it's eating particular kinds of foods. So sweets, carbohydrates, sugars. There's absolutely no evidence for happiness and, say, celery. But what's encouraging is that there's also strong data showing the benefits of happiness and exercise. You've probably heard about the link between happiness and endorphins, exercise. We feel happier while we are exercising. And in fact, we get that boost, that high, even after the exercise is over. So the good news is exercising is a great way to boost our happiness, and it doesn't matter what form that exercise takes. Now, we also know that shopping makes us feel happy, but the data is more interesting than you might think. So it's not shopping, acquiring things that gives us the biggest boost in terms of happiness. What actually makes us the happiest in terms of shopping is when we find the perfect gift for someone we care about. So the finding a perfect gift for someone we care about actually boosts happiness more than when we buy something for ourselves. And I'm going to return and talk about this link between giving and happiness at the end of my talk today. We also know that personality matters. I started today by saying, who are the kittens and rainbows people? And the reality is about 50% of our happiness is determined by our personality. And that means that some people have a head start on finding happiness. So what kinds of personality traits are associated with happiness? There pretty much are three. One is high self-esteem. This is a cartoon that shows the opposite. Dear diary, sorry to bother you again. So people who are high in self-esteem, they feel good about themselves. They can probably find it easy to anticipate positive outcomes, to find that silver lining. So that's one. Two, extroversion. People who are extroverted are outgoing, they're social. They probably find it easier to build a social network, to meet new people, and so on. And three, and this is really my favorite, people who are optimistic, people who can find that silver lining no matter what. Freud told a story, a classic example of optimism, about a couple who came to see him for therapy. And at some point during the course of the therapy session, the husband turned to the wife and said, if one of us were to die, I think I would go live in Paris. Because of course, it's one of us. You have this Paris plan. My oldest child has this remarkable ability to find the silver lining no matter what. Andrew struggled mightily in his first Spanish class in high school, enough that midway through his first trimester, he received a 50 warning grade. And at the end of the first trimester, he called me with what he reported was good news that he had climbed to a 58. And I said, that is not good news. And he said, no, it's 8 points higher than I had in October. And I said, you got an F in Spanish. And he said, a 58 is really an F plus. And I said, I'm a professor. There is no plus on the F. Like there's never a plus on the F. But he said, well, at the rate I'm going, I'm going to have a 66 in January. And I said, that's also not good. That's a D. But by all accounts, Andrew, will be very happy throughout his life. He's probably going to end up in prison, and hopefully not a Spanish speaking prison, but he's going to call home and be like, Mom, I got this bunk bed. I got this roommate, got this exercise yard. They bring in the meals through the door 3 times a day. It's so relaxing. Because honestly, anyone who can call home with the good news about the F plus, he's going to be happy. Might be poor, living in my basement, but he's going to be happy. And this ability to find the silver lining no matter what is tremendously predictive of happiness in all different kinds of circumstances. One of my favorite quotes that illustrates this is by Nelson Mandela. I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lays defeat and death. And to me, this is really the perfect illustration of the power of personality, to be able to find some kind of silver lining, even in really dire times. And the good news for all of us is that our ability to find happiness increases with age, no matter our personality. I'm going to show you now some fascinating data from a large Gallup poll of over 500,000 Americans. And these were Americans ages 18 to 85. And so here's the data. And I'm going to talk about the data, but what's really interesting also is that this study has been replicated in lots of different countries, and the shape of the data curve always looks exactly the same. So this is not a uniquely American or uniquely Western culture kind of finding. So what this data shows, first of all, is that happiness is pretty high in people who are in their teens and their 20s. And I want to be honest, this is data collected before COVID. So we've probably heard about the mental health crisis in adolescents and young adults. It's possible that this far left numbers are actually lower now than they used to be. So I want to be clear. However, but the important part that I take from this data that I think is consistent now is that happiness drops for people at around mid-age. This is, of course, what we think of as a midlife crisis. It's also, of course, perhaps coincidentally, a time at which many people have teenagers living in their homes. But then, and what is good news for all of us, happiness increases in your 60s, your 70s. And again, they study people up to age 85. And so this U-shaped curve is really interesting and also really consistent across cultures. So to examine what explains this increase in happiness for people after the so-called midlife crisis, researchers have done qualitative interviews with people across the lifespan, and what they found is very consistent. People in their younger years focus on having big social networks. People in their older years get rid of the riffraff, and they focus on having a smaller number of relationships, but with people who they care about and who care about them. So what they're doing with age is they're choosing quality over quantity. And that choice leads to greater happiness. It's actually perfectly illustrated in this following quote. As we grow up, we realize it is less important to have lots of friends and more important to have real ones. So this to me is a really important takeaway about the power of relationships and prioritizing quality over quantity. Also a point I'll return to at the end today. I now want to go to the second poll question, and that is, I've talked about a number of different findings, the importance of money not actually predicting happiness, our ability to adjust to different kinds of life events, giving and receiving versus receiving, that the personality matters so much, and finally, this issue of the quality of relationships matters more than the quantity. And I want to ask you, and again, no right answer, which of these findings do you think is the most important? This might be the one that you think is the most important for society, or the one that really resonates with you. But I think it's sort of important to think about what are the sort of key takeaways from the empirical research. So I'm asking you to give your answer. Again, no right answers, and I will share responses. Again, I'm a nerdy professor, so I always like to kind of see what are takeaways that people are having. All right, so half of you have participated so far. And if you want to get your response in, I'm going to, in the interest of time, because I want to make sure that I'm leaving time for Q&A at the end, I'm going to end the poll in 5 seconds. So if you want to get your response in, this is your last chance. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share the results. And so here's what's interesting. This was a tie. So the power of personality and the quality of relationships. These are the two. And all of these are important findings, but I always think it's interesting to see what kind of resonates with people. All right, so I now want to turn to just talk briefly about some key conclusions from the field of positive psychology. And then I will end by talking about specific strategies. So one, genes matter a lot. Estimates are that about 50% of our happiness is determined by our personality. I talked about that before. And the reason for that is that so much of happiness seems to be rooted in our genes. So people who are extroverted, people who are optimistic, people who are resilient, so we can bounce back when things don't go well. About 50% of our happiness is rooted in these sort of genetic predispositions. And that explains why some people really are the kittens and rainbows people and some people are not. It also explains why short-term things like more money, better cell phone, better climate, et cetera, don't have such a consistent impact on happiness. As this cartoon says, I could cry when I think of the years I wasted accumulating money, only to learn that my cheerful disposition is genetic. Yeah. So this finding also explains why short-term things don't have such a big impact. But here's what I think is the most important part of this finding, and that is what follows. This also means that 50% of our happiness is up to us. So even if you are not naturally one of the kittens and rainbows people, 50% of your happiness is in your control. And that's the part I care about. So that's conclusion one. Conclusion two, the power of adaptation. I've talked from the beginning of today about how we adapt. We adapt to more money. We adapt to life events. We adapt to a better cell phone. We adapt to climate, whatever. And so I've talked about adaptation as being something that's bad because you think, oh, I get more money, or, oh, I get a better cell phone. Surely I'm going to be happier forever. And the reality is no, initially you're happy and then you adapt. So these good things don't allow us to have lifetime happiness. But here's what's really important about the power of adaptation. And that is that it works in both ways. It also means that we adapt to really difficult life events. So this is a picture of my extended family. I'm actually in that picture. I don't know if you can recognize who I am, but I'm in there. And this is a story about my stepfather, who is the gentleman with the white hair at the very top of the stairs. So my stepfather, Howard, was married and had 3 daughters when his first wife died of cancer, leaving him as a single parent with 3 pretty young kids. So obviously, really tragic, really very hard. After that loss, he met my mother, and he became a stepdad to me and to my brother, and again, integrated with his 3 daughters from his first marriage. And then after they'd been married about 10 years, my mother died of cancer. So this was his second wife dying of cancer. He, obviously grieved, mourned, and then he married for a third time. And he is pictured in this photo beside his third and final wife, Brooks, who is beside him in that picture. And this is a picture of my stepfather and the person who he married for the third time. And this picture includes children from his first marriage, children from his second marriage, children from his third marriage. Again, he married a woman for the third time who also had children. And it includes grandchildren from the first, the second, and the third marriage. So I'm using that as an example on a very personal level that he grieved. He loved each of his wives. The loss was hard. The loss was difficult. But the power of the human spirit is such that even when really difficult things happen, we have the ability to cope, to gain support, to learn something from those experiences, and we have the ability to adapt and move on. And that to me is an extraordinarily important lesson because difficult things happen to all of us. They happen to all of us, sometimes beyond our control. So people get divorced, people have miscarriages, people lose loved ones, people get fired, people experience, difficult injuries and illnesses. And the key findings from the science of happiness research is that many people have the opportunity to actually learn and grow from those experiences. We call this post-traumatic growth. We talk a lot in society about post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, and that, of course, is a real and substantial phenomenon for many people. But we also have the ability, all of us, to grow and change in important and valuable ways following adverse life events and experience post-traumatic growth and find happiness again, even in the midst of loss. And the final point, takeaway for me that's the most important, is the power of effort. That although there are people who are the naturally happy kittens and rainbows people, for many people, happiness involves effort. It involves deciding that you want to be happy, that you deserve to be happy, and it involves making specific choices within your life to build a life that can bring you happiness, taking deliberate steps to make that a reality. As the author Elizabeth Gilbert says, happiness is the consequence of personal effort. You fight for it, strive for it, insist upon it, and sometimes even travel around the world looking for it. You have to participate relentlessly in the manifestations of your own blessings. And once you have achieved a state of happiness, you must never become lax about maintaining it. You must make a mighty effort to keep swimming upward into that happiness forever, to stay afloat on top of it. And to me, this is the most important takeaway, that all of us, no matter where we fall in that natural happiness genetic lottery, we can all take steps in our personal lives to increase our happiness. And so I'm now going to end, and I'm going to spend the last, sort of 10 minutes or so talking about specific strategies that we can all use to increase happiness. These are things like, sell all your belongings and move to Aruba. They're all things you can do. And I'm giving 10 because happiness is not one size fits all. For some people, certain strategies that I'm going to give will resonate. For other people, different strategies will resonate. So I'm giving you 10 because I'm really hoping that I will hit everyone with at least one specific strategy they can use and implement in your life moving forward. So 1, change your behavior. As I said before, there are lots of really low-level things that we can do that increase happiness. Getting enough sleep, better sleep, profoundly associated with better happiness, also better health. Exercise. We think about exercise in terms of benefiting our physical health. That's true, but it also benefits our happiness. Meditate. There's actually really interesting research. Some of this is being done at Mass General, showing that the act of meditating changes your brain in ways that make you feel happier. So adopt one, adopt all of these, but change your behavior in ways that scientific research bears out will increase happiness. 2, find your match professionally and personally. And I have this picture of a bungee jumper because this is sort of like the perfect illustration of something that some people are like, yeah, I'd love to do this. And other people, including me, are like, I would never do that. And so here's the thing. Thinking about what makes you happy is really important, because what makes you happy may not be the same thing as makes your spouse, your sibling, your child, your friend, your neighbor, your colleague happy. So figuring out what makes you happy is what's really important. And this could be true professionally and personally. As Steve Jobs said, the only way to do great work is to love what you do. So find what works for you. And again, this could be finding meaning in your career, your profession, your volunteer work, your community, your family, but figure out what feels good to you. 3, spend time in nature. Very, very consistent research shows that spending time in nature boosts happiness. We feel happier when we are in nature. We feel happier even looking at nature out a window. Now, the practical question is why? What's so beneficial about looking at nature? So to examine that question, researchers brought in people and put them in an fMRI machine to measure patterns of brain activity. And then they showed them different images. Here are 2 images that were actually used in this study. One was of a very pretty urban city skyline. The other, also very pretty picture, but it's of a rural nature scene. And what they found was that even though these pictures are both visually appealing, they have water and clouds and sky and colors, they're both visually appealing, people's brains respond in very different ways to these 2 images. People who are looking at the urban city skyline show lots of brain activity. The brain is active, it's firing. People looking at the rural nature scene show relaxed, calm brain waves, like they're meditating or sleeping. So again, this is a perfect illustration of how simply looking at a picture of nature is relaxing for the brain, probably helps reduce stress and thereby increase happiness. Now, this does not mean you need to move to Wyoming or North Dakota. Simply spending time in nature, even in the middle of an urban setting, also leads to greater happiness. Just walking through a park, at your lunch hour, after work, or, in the afternoon, increases happiness, lowers stress. So spend time in nature. 4, many of us focus on what's bad in our lives or what will be good eventually. And instead, we can focus intentionally on what we are grateful for, what is good in our lives right now. As Dale Carnegie famously said, one of the most tragic things I know about human nature is that all of us tend to put off living. We are all dreaming of some magical rose garden over the horizon instead of enjoying the roses that are blooming outside our windows today. So think about what makes you happy right now, not when I retire, when I win the lottery, when I move, when I whatever. What makes you happy right now? 5, make a gratitude visit. And this is one of my favorites. This is an idea that comes from a professor at Penn named Martin Seligman. And what he has people do is to write a letter to someone who played a meaningful role in changing and shaping their life and who they became. Could be a teacher, a mentor, a neighbor, a boss, a family member, whatever. Then you travel to that person, you stand in front of them, and you read the letter aloud. And as you can imagine, that feels pretty great to the person hearing the letter and the person who's reading the letter. And if there's someone that comes to your mind that really played this kind of a substantial role in your life, I want to urge you to do this one, because here's one of the challenges. Often we wait until we hear the person has died, and then we express what they meant to their widow, their family member. We do it in a eulogy. So if you have someone who played this role in your life, don't wait for the eulogy. 6, smile, even when you aren't happy. This is the fake it till you make it idea. And what's amazing is that the mere act of smiling changes how people respond to you, changes how you feel, and some fascinating research shows changes how your body responds to pain. Researchers in one very clever study brought in people and had them hold chopsticks in their teeth in one of 3 facial expressions: a neutral expression, a slight smile, or a big beaming smile. Then, while you held that facial expression, you had to put your hand in a bucket of freezing cold ice water. And they said, keep it there until you can't stand it anymore, and then pull your hand out. And here's what they found. People holding the big beaming smile kept their hand in the bucket of water significantly longer. So again, the mere act of smiling changed how their body responded to pain. 7, give anything to anyone. Lots of research suggests that the mere act of giving increases our own happiness. People who volunteer in their community, higher levels of happiness. People who donate to charity, happier. Every single country that's colored in green there's a positive correlation between charitable giving and happiness. Research using fMRI data has shown that when you just think about giving a gift to a friend, it activates a part of the brain that processes rewarding experiences. So again, just thinking about giving a gift to a friend feels as good to the brain as eating chocolate. Spend money wisely. I started today by saying, oh, it doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter. But the reality is you can spend money in better. Worse ways. How do you get more experience and reflect? Where'd you lose me? I cannot hear.
Right at the beginning of number 8.
Okay, good. I'm going to go back. I shut it to do that. All right. Right at the beginning of number 8. Okay. Spend money wisely. So I started today by saying, oh, it doesn't matter how much money you have, but the reality is how you spend your money is a strong predictor of happiness. So what's a good way to spend your money? Spending money on a trip, concert, tickets, big game. It is not spending money on experiences. You get to anticipate the experience, you get to experience the experience, and you get to reflect back on it. What isn't particularly good about spending money? Spending money on belongings, expensive watch, shoes, purse, car, whatever. Initially, it's exciting, but then it just becomes your watch. As nobody says on their deathbed, I should have bought more crap. And as philosopher Roger Corliss says, trying to be happy by accumulating possessions is like trying to satisfy hunger by taping sandwiches all over your body. Just doesn't bring you happiness. 9, avoid comparisons. And this is really an important one because I think for many people, they actually feel perfectly happy. And then they start comparing their own lives with those of other people around them. As this cartoon says, I do count my blessings, But then I end up counting those of others who have more and better blessings. And that pisses me off. As Teddy Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. And for many people, this feels particularly acute on social media, in which people post only the good stuff, or what I like to call fake book. And it's really important to remember that social media is not giving us an accurate rendition of somebody's life. It's a highlight reel. So avoid comparisons, and particularly avoid false comparisons. And finally, 10. And I saved this one for last because it's the most important. And that is build and maintain relationships. Relationships are the single best predictor of our happiness. And it's important to recognize that building and maintaining relationships takes work. It takes time and energy and effort and conflict and compromise. I use this picture as a metaphor because I think it perfectly illustrates this challenge that when you look at a dancer on point from a distance, it looks easy and effortless and magical. But the reality of dancing on point is your feet are bloodied and bruised and calloused. It's hard. And my final quote for you today perfectly illustrates this point, and it's by Tolstoy. But on entering upon family life, he saw at every step that it was utterly different from what he had imagined. At every step, he experienced what a man would experience who, after admiring the smooth, happy course of a little boat on a lake, should get himself into that little boat. He saw that it was not all sitting still, floating smoothly, that one had to think too, not for an instant to forget where one was floating, and that there was water under one, and that one must row, and that his unaccustomed hands would be sore, and that it was only to look at it that was easy, but that doing it, though very delightful, was very difficult. And that's really the key. Close relationships, the single best predictor of happiness, but you don't get those relationships without being willing to spend time and energy and effort and conflict and compromise. And I want to turn now to my final poll. I'm always just interested in seeing what people's takeaways were. As I said before, happiness is not one size fits all. So this poll, the final poll, is multiple choice. So you can select as many of these as you want. Remember to scroll down. And I want to say, which of these do you find most helpful? These could be things that you're already doing in your life that you really find helpful, or they could be things that you haven't done, but you're like, maybe I should try this. So I'll stop talking for a minute and let you scroll down. And then after this poll, I will say we're going to go to Q&A. Which you're welcome to type a question into the chat room and I can respond. I can read it and respond. You also can raise your hand and come off mute and ask it, that way, which is absolutely fine. I also, the last slide, which is the next slide, I will include my email address, and anybody who would like a copy of the slide deck or has a question that they think of later on, or maybe you're watching this as a recording, it's absolutely fine to reach out to me if you want to have a question that, maybe you don't think of right now, but you want to ask later on. That's absolutely fine too. All right. So I'm going to give you, about another 10 seconds or so. 66% of you have answered. And then we will turn to Q&A. So please be thinking of your questions. And I'm going to close the poll in 5 seconds. I'm sorry if I'm rushing anyone, but I want to make sure we have time for Q&A before people need to run. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to end the poll. And let's see, I always just scan for the top. So 100% of people said spend money on experiences. 75% of you all said give. And then there were also pretty high numbers, half of you for avoid comparisons, build and maintain relationships, express gratitude, spend time in nature. So great. And there are the results there. I'm sharing those with you. So again, you can see the sort of top vote getters. All right. So thank you all so much for listening. I'm ending with a picture of my dogs, and I end with this because it's the number one question that I ask if I don't talk about pets. And that is, do pets make us happy? Yes, absolutely. Pets make us happy. And as I often say, maybe the reason for that is that dogs, pets give us unconditional love. You don't actually have to do that time, energy, effort, conflict, and compromise. Glad to talk more about the research if anyone's interested. I've actually written a couple pieces looking at the power of dogs in particular. And I want to say, if anyone is interested in sort of some of the nitty gritty research that I talked about today, most of this talk is taken from my book, The Positive Shift. which is available on independent bookstores and libraries and Audible, etc. And I also have a free Substack newsletter called How to Feel Better. So if anyone is interested in that, if you shoot me an email, I'm glad to add it to you if you're on Substack already. And that comes out every Thursday, in which there's just one little small tidbit. Because boy, these days it seems like more happiness in the world is good for us all. And I'm going to just type my email in the chat room in case, again, is interested in getting a copy of the slide deck. You can also reach out on my website, which is on the page there. So thank you all so much for listening. Really hoping everyone got something they can use and implement in their lives moving forward. And I look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Catherine. That was great. Does anybody have any questions? I have. Oh, Roxanne, go for it.
Well, thanks. I thought that was really interesting. And I wonder, and maybe you address this in your book, but when you are a kittens and rainbows person, but your children are not, what are some strategies maybe for managing those relationships so you don't piss them off by always seeing the, because a person who is often accused of toxic positivity, it's really hard sometimes when someone's personality, just the way they are, is so different from your own. And you're concerned about the person's happiness.
Yeah. So first of all, I think that's really a lovely question. And one as a mom of three, I think about a lot. So I'll say a couple things. One, I'm married to somebody who is a kittens and rainbows person, and I am not. So again, I think people often see the world in very different ways. I think one of the keys is that for different people, happiness is found in different ways. And so I often, and I talk about this regularly with my college students, but also my, biological children. And that is that, one, even people who are not the naturally kittens and rainbows people can do things to find greater happiness. That I think for people like you, happiness comes very easily. It's like telling somebody to breathe. You don't have to be reminded to be happy because you're naturally happy. For people who are not naturally kittens and rainbows people, there's often this belief that they're just not going to be happy. There's nothing they can do. And so one of the things that I think is really important to share as a message with people in our lives who maybe aren't naturally happy is that there are things we can do. Maybe it's going to take more effort, and maybe they're going to have to exert effort to do it, but there are things that can make people happy who are not naturally happy. So it's in our own control. It's not something that, oh, well, I missed out on this, with the genetic lottery. The other thing is that I think for different people, and I did talk about this sort of earlier in the talk, that different things make people happy. So the thing, some people are like, oh, I love gardening or I love running. And other people are like, I hate gardening. I hate running. And so trying to find for different people, it's different things. So maybe for you, it's volunteering. And for one of your kids, it's exercising. And for you, it might be this. And so also thinking through and sharing strategies with your loved ones about, hey, you seem kind of blue, here's something you could try. I also want to make another very important point, and that is that this talk is for people who are basically like here in terms of happiness, and they would like to be higher. This talk is not for people who are in the middle of clinical depression. For people who are in the midst of clinical depression and are struggling, this is not therapy. This is not the equivalent of the antidepressant. I'm a strong believer in drug therapy, strong believer in talk therapy. And so I also want to say, some of people are like, you're depressed, go for a walk, start volunteering, you'll feel better. For people who are really in the throes of things, strong believer in good therapy, including talk therapy and drug therapy. And sometimes that sort of oomph is what it takes for people to sort of realize, oh, there are things that I can do, because it's very hard for people who are really struggling to sort of feel confident and comfortable taking steps to head in the right direction. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was so interesting. You sort of got close to answering it toward the end of the last question, but I was initially going to phrase it like, what if you're kind of stuck in post-traumatic stress disorder as opposed to post-traumatic growth? Or another way of wording it would be, what if you're stuck in a really bad situation? Like, you're not clinically depressed, but like, what's the advice? I mean, I guess the same advice, but it just feels a little harder.
Yeah, no. And so I really appreciate that question. And I think there are a couple different things. So number one, you don't have to be in a state of clinical depression to benefit from therapy and or antidepressants. So I just want to be clear about that, that people, you don't want to kind of get stuck. It's kind of like, you don't want to wait till your car runs out of gas to kind of fill up your car, right? I mean, so I important. So that's number one. I think really is about taking steps to feel a little bit better. And so picking off of the 10 things. So I share 10 things at the end that are scientifically, empirically proven to increase happiness for people. But many people who are struggling have trouble doing those things because they feel stuck, they feel mired, they feel overwhelmed. And so picking off a couple things that you can do. Okay, you know what? I can't control all these other things, but what I can do is I can go out every day and take a 15-minute walk with a friend in nature. And that's I call that like a win-win-win, right? Because it's nature and friend, et cetera. That's just one example. I think that practicing self-care, especially if we're in a really difficult circumstance. I actually wrote in my Substack newsletter last week, I'm going to not say the title right, but something like, it's okay to do less when you're dealing with more. It's okay to do less when you're dealing with more. And I think part of it is that sometimes when you're really feeling like there's a lot of heavy stuff, that you've experienced loss, that you're, in a precarious situation, in terms of finances, when there, really are heavy things weighing on you, showing some self-compassion. You know what? Maybe today I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to be able to do all the things I want, but I'm going to do this one thing that really takes care of me, and is self-care. So treating yourself with some compassion. It's also the case that thinking about relying on social support when you are struggling is really important. And that doesn't have to be a romantic partner or a family member. It could be a friend, it could be a colleague, it could be a neighbor, but getting some support. It's really hard to do things alone. And if we're really struggling, doing things alone is really hard. One thing that I talk about a lot is the importance of authenticity. And I think one of the challenges is that people often hide when things are hard. And that makes them feel like things are hard and they're also alone. And so if things are hard, and there are people in your life that you trust and that you can talk about, being able to share about that is really, really powerful, because often that can be a way of getting support, and learning, oh, wait, I'm dealing with this, but so are all these other people. And that can make the getting stuck feel a little bit easier.
Thank you.
Good luck, Alice.
Thanks.
I don't see any other questions. And again, when you invite a professor to talk, a professor can talk. So, if I've overstayed my welcome, I'm glad to say goodbye. Also, glad to have people contact me later on if a question, occurs.
Thanks so much, Catherine. This was really great. And thanks everybody for being here this evening.
Thank you, Professor. It was terrific. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Have a nice rest of your evening. Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Thank you. It was terrific.
Good night.